They say you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. But no one tells you what happens when you save someone who is never supposed to die in the first place. I stood in that room full of the world's best surgeons, holding my grandmother's journal in hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and I knew that if I walked away, I would lose more than the woman dying on that bed. I would lose the part of myself that still believed I mattered. So I didn't walk away. And the man who watched me save his mother? He looked at me like I'd just rewritten the laws of the universe. Turns out I had. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered whether the knowledge you carry matters when the world tells you it doesn't, then maybe you need to hear what happened next. Because women like us, we're told to stay quiet. But staying quiet doesn't save lives. And it sure as hell doesn't change them. 4 hours of sleep. That's what I'd managed before my phone's alarm dragged me back into consciousness at 4:47 a.m. on a January morning, so cold the rain turned to ice the moment it hit the pavement. I didn't move right away. I lay there in the dark of my studio apartment, listening to the radiator clank and hiss, and I thought about the number in my bank account. $27,314. 6 years of saving. 6 years of 3 jobs, of skipping meals, of wearing the same coat until the lining tore, and I had to safety pin it back together. 6 years, and I was still $212,686 short. From the couch on the other side of the room, I heard Micah cough, that dry, rattling sound that always made my chest tighten. He was 22. He should have been out living his life, making mistakes, falling in love. Instead, he was dying. Slowly. His blood turning against him, cell by cell, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it except work myself into the ground trying to afford a treatment that might buy him a few more years. I forced myself up. There wasn't time for self-pity. Not when I had a delivery route to run before my shift at the warehouse, and catering gig on Saturday if I wanted to keep the lights on. The apartment was small enough that I could see Micah from where I stood in the kitchenette, pouring yesterday's coffee into a thermos. He was asleep, his face too pale against the pillow, dark circles carved deep beneath his eyes. He'd been getting worse. I could see it in the way he moved, slower, more careful, like his own body had become something fragile he was trying not to break. I should have woken him. Should have made him eat something before I left. But I didn't have the heart to disturb the first peaceful sleep he'd had in days. So I grabbed my delivery bag, my grandmother's journal, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag to protect it from the rain, and I left. The streets of Seattle were empty at this hour, the city still sleeping under a blanket of fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I liked it this way. Quiet. Anonymous. Just me and the hum of the van's engine and the rain drumming against the windshield. My first delivery was a box of syringes and 4 bags to a clinic on the north side. The second was gauze and antiseptic to a nursing home in Ballard. And the third, the one I'd done every Tuesday for the past 8 months, was a shipment of specialized medical supplies to the Wells estate. I'd never met the Wells family, never even seen inside the house. The housekeeper, Iris, always met me at the service entrance with a clipboard and a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd sign for the delivery, tip me $5, and send me on my way. It was routine. Forgettable. The kind of job you do without thinking because you've done it 100 times before. But when I pulled up to the estate that morning, something was different. The gates were open. They were never open. I sat in the van for a moment, engine idling, staring up at the house. Every window on the first and second floors was blazing with light. Not the warm, golden glow of a house at rest, but the harsh, clinical brightness of an emergency. I could see shadows moving behind the glass. Quick, frantic, too many of them. And then I heard it. A scream. High and desperate and raw. The kind of sound that cuts straight through you and lodges itself somewhere deep in your chest where you can't shake it loose. I turned off the engine, grabbed the delivery bag, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was out of the van and running toward the house. The front door was unlocked. I didn't knock. I pushed it open and stepped into a world I had no right to enter. A marble foyer so vast it could have swallowed my entire apartment, a chandelier overhead dripping with crystals that caught the light and scattered it across the walls like broken stars. But I didn't stop to stare. I followed the sound of voices, raised, urgent, laced with panic, up a sweeping staircase and down a hallway lined with portraits of people whose names I would never know. And then I saw the room. It was open, the door thrown wide. Inside, I counted them without meaning to, 30 surgeons, all in scrubs or white coats, all crowding around a bed where a woman lay dying. I knew she was dying because I'd seen it before. Not in a medical textbook, not in a hospital, in my grandmother's journal. The woman on the bed, small, silver-haired, her veins spider-webbed black beneath her skin, was convulsing. Her breath came in shallow, broken gasps. The monitors beside her screamed in alarm, numbers flashing red, and the surgeons were shouting over each other, trying medications, adjusting 4 lines, doing everything they'd been trained to do. And it wasn't working, because they were treating the wrong illness. I didn't think. I stepped into the room, my voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Stop. Every head turned toward me. 30 of the most renowned surgeons in the world, and they were staring at me, a delivery driver in a rain-soaked jacket, holding a medical supply bag and a plastic-wrapped journal, like I'd just walked in from another planet. A man in the front stepped forward, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, his voice dripping with contempt. "Who the hell are you?" I didn't answer him. I looked past him, to the woman on the bed, to the black veins, to the way her fingers were curling inward, rigid and trembling. "It's not a stroke," I said. "It's poison." The room went silent. And then someone laughed. Security, the gray-haired surgeon, Dr. Calloway, I'd learn later, said coldly, "Get her out of here." But before the guards could move, another voice cut through the room. "Wait." It was quiet, controlled, but it carried the kind of authority that made everyone freeze. I turned toward the sound, and for the first time, I saw him. He stood in the far corner of the room, half in shadow, and even in the chaos, even in the presence of 30 brilliant minds and a woman on the edge of death, he was the only thing I could see. Tall, still, unnervingly beautiful in a way that didn't feel quite human. His suit was white, pristine, and his eyes, when they met mine, were the color of smoke and winter mornings. And he was looking at me like he could see straight through to the part of myself I'd spent years trying to hide. "Let her speak," he said. I didn't realize I was still holding my breath until he spoke, until those 2 words, "let her speak," gave me permission to exist in a room where I had no right to be. The man in white didn't move from his corner. He didn't need to. Everyone else had already stepped back, creating a space around me that felt less like an invitation and more like a test. Dr. Calloway's jaw tightened. "Mr. Wells, with all due respect, this is a medical emergency. We don't have time for." "Then don't waste it." The man's voice was soft, but it cut clean through Calloway's protest. His eyes never left mine. "She said it's poison. I want to know why she thinks that." My hands were shaking. I could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes on me, could hear the monitors still screaming, could see the woman on the bed, Vivian, his mother, convulsing harder now, her body arching off the mattress like something inside her was trying to claw its way out. I'd seen this before. Not in person, but in my grandmother's journal, in the careful ink drawings she'd made of plants and symptoms and the old ways of healing that the world had decided to forget. "The veins," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The way they're turning black from the inside out. That's not a stroke. Strokes don't move like that, they don't spread." And her breathing. I stepped closer to the bed, ignoring Calloway's sharp intake of breath. "It's not labored because her lungs are failing. It's shallow because her blood can't carry oxygen anymore. Something's binding to it, blocking it." "That's absurd," Calloway said. "We've run every toxicology screen available. There's nothing. Because you're looking for the wrong thing." I pulled my grandmother's journal from the plastic bag, the pages soft and worn from years of use. I didn't care how it looked, didn't care that it was held together with rubber bands and hope. I flipped to the page I needed, the one I'd read so many times I could recite it in my sleep. bloodflower toxin. It doesn't show up on modern screens because it breaks down too fast. By the time you test for it, it's already integrated into the bloodstream. But the symptoms, I held the journal up, showing them my grandmother's drawings. Black veins, shallow breathing, convulsions that get worse the more you try to stabilize the patient with standard treatments. You're feeding it. Every medication you pump into her is making it stronger. The room went so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Calloway looked at the journal like I'd just shown him a children's coloring book. This is folklore. Superstition. We're not in the Dark Ages. Then why is she still dying? My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. Hated that I sounded desperate instead of certain. But I was desperate. Because I knew what it felt like to watch someone you love slip away while people with credentials and authority told you there was nothing to be done. You've tried everything, haven't you? Every protocol, every medication, every cutting-edge treatment you could think of. And she's still dying. So maybe, just maybe, you're wrong. Calloway's face flushed red. You have no medical training. No credentials. He glanced at my jacket, at the logo stitched on the chest. You're a delivery driver. And you want us to believe you know something that 30 of the best surgeons in the world don't. I don't want you to believe anything. I looked past him, to the man in the corner, to Jerry L. Wells, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I just want you to let me try. For a moment, no one moved. The monitors kept screaming. Vivian kept seizing. And I stood there, holding my grandmother's journal like a shield, knowing that if he said no, if he told me to leave, I would have to live with the knowledge that I could have saved her and didn't. What do you need? Jeriel's voice was quiet, but it shattered the silence like glass. Calloway turned on him. Mr. Wells, you cannot seriously be considering.
What
Do you need?
It wasn't a question this time.
I swallowed hard. Salt water.
Cold.
As cold as you can get it. Bloodroot tincture if you have it, but if you don't, I can work with raw root, white willow bark, valerian. And I need you to stop every medication you're giving her right now. That will kill her, Calloway said flatly. She's already dying. I looked at Vivian, at the way her fingers were curling inward, rigid and blue, at the way her chest barely moved. You've got maybe 5 minutes before her heart stops. So either let me try, or spend the rest of your career wondering if a delivery driver with a folklore book could have done what you couldn't. I shouldn't have said it. I knew that the moment the words left my mouth. But I was tired, so damn tired, of being invisible, of being dismissed, of carrying knowledge that mattered, and being told it didn't because I didn't have the right degrees, the right credentials, the right last name. Calloway looked like he wanted to throw me out himself. But Jeriel raised one hand, and the room went still. Do it, he said. And then, to Calloway, if she fails, you can call security. But if you stop her now and my mother dies, I will hold you personally responsible. Are we clear? Calloway's mouth opened.
Closed.
He looked around the room, searching for support, but no one met his eyes. Finally, he stepped back, his expression somewhere between fury and resignation.
Fine.
But when this goes wrong, it won't. I didn't know if I believed that. But I said it anyway, because doubt was a luxury I couldn't afford. I moved to the bed, setting the journal on the nightstand where I could see it. My hands were shaking again, but I forced them steady as I opened my delivery bag and pulled out the supplies I always carried, the ones I'd packed that morning without knowing why. Bloodroot, white willow bark, valerian, the herbs my grandmother had taught me to recognize, to harvest, to use when modern medicine failed. Someone brought me the salt water. Someone else disconnected the 4 lines, their hands moving reluctantly, like they were betraying everything they'd been taught. And I began to work. I didn't think about the 30 surgeons watching me. Didn't think about Jerry L. standing in the shadows, his gaze so heavy I could feel it on my skin. I thought about my grandmother's voice, patient and sure, walking me through the steps. I thought about Micah, about all the nights I'd sat beside him and wished I could do more than just watch him fade. I thought about every woman who'd been told her knowledge didn't matter because it didn't come with a degree. And I worked. 5 minutes. That's all I had. I prayed it was enough. My hand stopped shaking the moment I touched her. I don't know why. Maybe it was muscle memory. Years of watching my grandmother work, of holding herbs while she ground them, of learning to trust my hands even when my mind screamed that I had no idea what I was doing. Or maybe it was something else. Something older. The kind of knowing that lives in your bones, passed down through generations of women who healed in the dark because the light didn't want them. I soaked the cloths in salt water so cold it burned my fingers, then pressed them to Vivian's wrists, her throat, the inside of her elbows where the black veins branched like lightning under her skin. The cold would slow her heart, buy us time. I mixed the bloodroot tincture with white willow bark, my grandmother's voice echoing in my head. 3 drops, Anna. No more. Too much, and you'll stop her heart instead of saving it. 3 drops. I counted them twice. I was 12 the first time I watched my grandmother save someone. Mrs. Tran from 2 floors down, poisoned by mushrooms she'd foraged in the park, too proud to admit she didn't know the difference between edible and deadly. The doctors at the ER had sent her home, told her it was food poisoning, that she'd be fine in a few days. But my grandmother took one look at her, at the way her lips were turning blue, at the tremor in her hands, and she knew. She'd pulled me into the kitchen, handed me a mortar and pestle, and said, "Pay attention. Someday, someone's life might depend on you remembering this." I hadn't believed her then. I was 12. I thought knowledge was something you got from textbooks, from teachers with degrees, from institutions that told you what was real and what was folklore. It took me 19 years to learn she was right. I tilted Vivian's head back, careful, and administered the tincture under her tongue. Her body jerked once, violently, and I heard one of the surgeons inhale sharply behind me, ready to say I told you so, ready to call security, ready to drag me out before I could do any more damage. But I didn't stop. I couldn't, because I'd seen this before, too. The way the body fights before it surrenders. The way it rages against the thing that's killing it, even when you're trying to help. I placed my hands on her chest and began the breath work, slow, rhythmic compressions, not CPR, but something older. Something my grandmother had called the pulse of life, a way of manually oxygenating blood when the lungs couldn't do it alone. Press and release. Press and release. Counting in my head, matching the rhythm to the fading beep of the heart monitor. The room was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Could hear the rustle of fabric as someone shifted their weight. Could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes watching me work, waiting for me to fail. And then I felt him. Jeriel. He'd moved closer without making a sound, and now he stood just behind my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating off him like he'd just stepped in from the winter outside.
He didn't speak, didn't touch me.
But his presence was so overwhelming, so absolute, that for a moment I forgot where I was. I forced myself to focus, to count,
to breathe.
Please, I thought. I didn't know who I was praying to. My grandmother, maybe. Or whatever force in the universe decided who lived and who died, who mattered and who didn't. Please let this work. Please let me be enough. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The black veins under Vivian's skin began to fade, slowly, so slowly. I thought I was imagining it. But then I saw it clearly. The darkness retreating, pulling back toward her heart like a tide going out. Her convulsions slowed. Stopped. Her breathing deepened. And then, impossibly, her eyes opened. They were gray, pale and clouded with pain. But they were open. She looked at me, confused, like she was trying to remember how she'd gotten here, why there was a stranger's face hovering over hers instead of the doctor's she'd expected to see. "You're all right," I whispered, even though my voice was shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. "You're all right now." She blinked once.
Twice.
And then her gaze shifted past me, to the man standing in the shadows. "Jeriel," she breathed, and the relief in her voice was so raw, so complete, that I had to look away. I stepped back, my legs trembling, and nearly collapsed. Someone caught my elbow, one of the nurses, but I barely registered it. I was staring at Vivian, at the way color was returning to her face, at the way her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm that shouldn't have been possible 5 minutes ago. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. The room was still silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the tense, expectant quiet of people waiting for a disaster. This was the silence of people who'd just witnessed something they couldn't explain. Something that shouldn't have worked but did. Dr. Calloway was staring at me like I'd just performed a magic trick, his face caught somewhere between wonder and fury. The other surgeons were murmuring to each other, checking Vivian's vitals, running new tests as if they could retroactively make sense of what had just happened. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Jeriel. He hadn't moved. Hadn't rushed to his mother's side the way I expected. He was still standing in the same spot, watching me with an expression I couldn't name. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was something deeper, something that made my chest tighten and my pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline. He looked at me like I was a mystery he'd just decided to solve. "What is your name?" His voice was quiet, but it cut through the murmurs like a blade through silk. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. My hands were still shaking. "Anna," I said. "Anna Gates." He repeated it, slowly, like he was tasting the syllables, testing their weight. And then he smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of his mouth that shouldn't have affected me the way it did. "Anna Gates," he said. "You just saved my mother's life." I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that I hadn't done anything extraordinary, that I'd just used the knowledge my grandmother had given me, the knowledge that people like Dr. Calloway dismissed as folklore and superstition. So I said the only thing that made sense. "I need to go." I grabbed my journal, shoved it back into the plastic bag, and turned toward the door. My legs felt like they were made of water, but I forced them to move. One step, then another. Wait. I should have kept walking. Should have ignored him. But something in his voice made me stop, made me turn back even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave before someone asked questions I couldn't answer. Jeriel was still watching me, and in his eyes I saw something I recognized because I'd felt it myself 100 times. He saw me. Not the delivery driver. Not the woman in the rain-soaked jacket with no credentials and no right to be here. He saw me. The part of myself I'd spent years trying to hide, trying to protect because being seen meant being vulnerable, and I couldn't afford vulnerability when I had a brother who needed me to be strong. "Thank you," he said quietly. And then, softer, almost too soft to hear. "I won't forget this." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just nodded once and walked out of that room, out of that house, back into the cold Seattle rain where I could finally breathe again. But his words followed me. "I won't forget this." Neither would I. I didn't tell Micah what happened at the Wells estate. There was no point. He had enough to worry about without me adding mysterious billionaires and impossible healings to the list. So I went back to my life, back to the deliveries and the warehouse shifts and the weekend catering gigs where I smiled at people who looked through me like I was part of the furniture. 7 days. That's how long it took for everything to fall apart. I was on my route when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Telemarketers, probably, or another debt collector asking about medical bills I couldn't pay. But something made me pull over, made me pick up. "Is this Anna Gates?" The voice was professional, clipped. "A nurse, maybe. Or a doctor's assistant." "Yes. This is Harborview Medical Center. Your brother Micah was brought in 20 minutes ago. He collapsed at work. You're listed as his emergency contact." The rest of the conversation was white noise. I remember dropping the phone. Remember the way my hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Remember running every red light between North Seattle and the hospital, praying to a God I'd stopped believing in years ago.
"Please."
Not yet. Not like this. They'd put him in the ICU. That's how I knew it was bad. Not in the ER, not in observation, but straight to intensive care, where they put people who were circling the drain. The nurse at the desk wouldn't let me see him right away, told me the doctors were stabilizing him, told me to wait in the family area like I was supposed to sit there calmly while my baby brother died behind a door I couldn't open. So I waited. I sat in a plastic chair that smelled like disinfectant and fear, and I counted the tiles on the ceiling because if I stopped counting, I would start screaming. When the doctor finally came out, I knew before he said a word. I could see it in his face, that careful, practiced expression they teach you in medical school, the one that says I'm about to ruin your life and there's nothing either of us can do about it. Miss Gates. He sat down beside me, which somehow made it worse. Your brother's condition has deteriorated significantly. The blood disorder has progressed faster than we anticipated. Without immediate intervention, experimental treatment that's not covered by insurance, he has perhaps 3 weeks. Maybe less. 3 weeks. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. 3 weeks wasn't enough time. 3 weeks wasn't enough to say goodbye, to tell him all the things I should have told him years ago, to make up for every birthday I'd missed because I was working, every time I'd been too tired to just be with him. How much? My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. The treatment protocol runs approximately $240,000. I laughed. I actually laughed, because what else was there to do? I had $27,000 in savings. My grandmother's apartment might sell for $40,000 if I was lucky. That left me $173,000 short. I could work every job in Seattle for the next decade and still not have enough. I see. The doctor's voice was gentle. Too gentle. I understand this is difficult, but you should know that we have payment plans and there are sometimes charitable foundations that help in cases like. I stopped listening. Stopped hearing anything except the blood rushing in my ears like a tide coming in to drown me. I stood up, walked to the ICU viewing window, pressed my hand against the glass, so hard it hurt. Micah was in there. I could see him through the window, small and pale in a bed surrounded by machines, tubes running into his arms, a breathing mask over his face. 22 years old. He should have been graduating college. Should have been falling in love, making mistakes, living a life that was his instead of borrowed time we'd been fighting for since the day he was diagnosed. I'd failed him. I'd worked 3 jobs for 6 years, and I'd still failed him. I'm sorry, I thought, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. I'm so sorry. I tried so hard. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that the nurses stopped checking on me. Long enough that visiting hours ended and the night shift came on. Long enough that my legs went numb and my hand left a fog print on the glass that faded and reappeared with each breath. And then, somewhere around 3 a.m., I felt it. That same presence I'd felt at the Wells estate. Cold and absolute and impossible to ignore. I turned slowly and he was there. Jerry L. Wells. Standing in the hallway like he'd materialized out of the shadows themselves, still wearing that white suit, still watching me with those smoke-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense I'd ever built. How did you? I started, but my voice cracked. I cleared my throat. Tried again. How did you know I was here? I've been keeping track. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like it was normal for a man like him to follow a delivery driver to a hospital at 3 a.m., your brother. The doctors said. I know what they said. I turned back to the window, unable to look at him, unable to let him see what was happening to my face. There's nothing I can do. So, unless you came here to watch me fall apart, you should probably leave. Silence. And then, the treatment has been paid for. I went very still.
What?
The experimental protocol. All of it. The bill was settled this morning. I turned back to him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. What are you talking about? The Wells Foundation covers medical expenses for families in need. Your brother qualified.
No.
I shook my head, backing away from him, even though there was nowhere to go.
No.
I didn't apply for anything. I didn't ask. You didn't have to. He took a step closer, and I hated how much space he took up, how his presence seemed to fill the entire hallway. Anna, your brother is dying. And you're standing here destroying yourself because you think you have to carry this alone. You don't. I don't want your charity. The words came out sharper than I meant them to, edged with panic and fury, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. I don't need. This isn't charity. His voice was quiet, but it stopped me cold. You saved my mother's life. The most important person in my world. And I couldn't even pay you because you walked out before I had the chance. So this isn't charity, Anna. This is what you're owed. I stared at him, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. You can't just, people don't just do things like this. There has to be a catch. There has to be something you want. There is. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his jaw tightened like he was choosing his words carefully. I want you to let me help. I want you to stop carrying the weight of the world alone. And I want you to understand that you matter. What you did, what you know matters. My eyes burned. I blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of him, refusing to let him see how close I was to breaking.
Why?
Because I've lived a very long time. He said it strangely, like the words meant more than they should. And I've never met anyone like you. I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to hold the weight of what he'd just done, what he'd just given me. So I did the only thing I could. I walked past him, back toward the ICU, and I whispered two words that felt like surrender and salvation all at once. Thank you. Micah's treatment started the next day. I watched through the ICU window as they administered the first round, watched the way his body tensed, then relaxed, like he'd been holding his breath for 6 years and could finally exhale. The doctors said it would take weeks to know if it was working, but I could already see the difference. The grayness was leaving his skin. His breathing came easier. He was going to live. And I didn't know what to do with that knowledge except cry in the hospital bathroom where no one could see me fall apart. The invitation came 3 days later. Heavy cream cardstock, my name written in elegant script that looked like it belonged in a museum. Vivian Wells requests the pleasure of your company for tea at the estate. Thursday, 2 p.m. We have much to discuss. I should have thrown it away. Should have ignored it and gone back to my deliveries and my warehouse shifts and the life I understood. But I didn't. Because some part of me, the part that had pressed my hand against the ICU glass and begged the universe for a miracle, needed to know why. Why Jeriel had saved my brother. Why he looked at me the way he did. Why I couldn't stop thinking about him, even when I tried. So on Thursday, I stood at the gates of the Wells estate again, wearing the only dress I owned that didn't smell like the warehouse, and I rang the bell. The woman who answered wasn't the housekeeper I'd expected. She was small, silver-haired, her face carrying the kind of beauty that age couldn't touch. Vivian Wells. The woman I'd saved. Anna. She smiled, and it was warm, genuine in a way I wasn't used to from people who lived in houses like this. I'm so glad you came. Please follow me. She led me through the house, past rooms filled with art I couldn't name and furniture that probably cost more than my car, out to a garden so beautiful it didn't feel real. Roses climbed white trellises. A fountain murmured in the center. And in the corner, beneath a pergola draped in wisteria, a table was set for two. We sat. She poured tea, real tea, in china cups so delicate I was afraid to hold them, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. You saved my life, she said finally. And I never got the chance to thank you properly. You don't have to. I do. She set her cup down, her gray eyes, so much like Jeriel's, fixed on mine. Because what you did shouldn't have been possible. 30 of the world's best surgeons tried to save me, and they failed. But you didn't. And I need to know, do you understand why? I hesitated. The poison, bloodflower toxin, my grandmother's journal, had methods that work on immortal blood. She said it calmly, like she was telling me the weather. Methods that modern medicine doesn't recognize because modern medicine was never designed to treat people like us. The air went very still. Somewhere in the garden, a bird was singing, but it sounded like it was coming from very far away. People like you, I repeated slowly. I'm human, Anna. But my son is not. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the stone. I don't understand what you're telling me. Yes, you do. Her voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath it. You're a smart woman. You've already put it together. You just don't want to believe it. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. You're saying he's what? Some kind of vampire. She said the word without hesitation. One of the oldest of his kind. A king among immortals. And the poison that nearly killed me wasn't random, Anna. It was an assassination attempt. A challenge from rival factions who want to see him fall. I laughed. It came out high and brittle, the sound of something breaking. This is insane. Vampires aren't. They're not real. This is. Your grandmother's journal contains remedies for bloodflower poisoning, Vivian said calmly. A poison that doesn't exist in any modern medical database. A poison specifically designed to target immortal blood. How do you think she knew about it? I opened my mouth.
Closed it.
Because she was right. I'd never questioned where my grandmother's knowledge came from, never asked why her journal contained treatments for conditions that didn't have names, for afflictions the world had decided didn't exist. I need to leave. I backed toward the garden gate, my whole body trembling. I need to. Anna. His voice stopped me cold. Jeriel was standing in the doorway to the garden, half in shadow, exactly as he'd been that first night. But something was different now. The careful control I'd seen in him before was slipping, like a mask he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it was there. Don't run, he said quietly. Please. Tell me it's not true. My voice broke on the words. Tell me she's lying, that this is some kind of... He stepped into the garden, and the sunlight hit him fully.
He didn't burn.
Didn't turn to ash. He just stood there, devastatingly beautiful and utterly impossible, and I understood then why folklore had gotten it wrong. The danger of vampires wasn't that they were monsters. It was that they looked like salvation. I can't tell you that, he said. And then he moved. One moment he was standing by the door. The next he was in front of me, so fast my brain couldn't process the movement, couldn't reconcile the space between where he'd been and where he was. His hand caught my wrist, gentle but unyielding, and when I looked up into his face I saw them.
Fangs.
Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to know I wasn't hallucinating, that this was real, that every fairy tale I dismissed as childhood nonsense was standing in front of me wearing a white suit and looking at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. I should have screamed.
Should have run.
Should have done anything except stand there, frozen, feeling the ice cold of his touch against my skin and the heat of my own pulse pounding in my throat. I have lived for 800 years, he said, and his voice was so quiet I had to lean closer to hear it. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have loved and lost and learned that immortality is less a gift than a sentence. And in all that time, in all those centuries, I have never met anyone like you. You don't know me. My voice came out as a whisper. I know you saved my mother when everyone else had given up. I know you carry knowledge the world tried to bury. I know you work yourself to exhaustion for a brother you love more than your own life. I know you're standing here right now, terrified, and you still haven't pulled away from me. He was right. I hadn't. His hand was still wrapped around my wrist, cold as winter, and I could feel my pulse hammering against his fingers. Could feel the way something in me was pulling toward him even as every rational thought I had was screaming at me to run. What do you want from me? I asked. His thumb brushed across the inside of my wrist, right over the place where my heartbeat was strongest, and the touch sent lightning up my arm. I want you to choose, he said. I want you to look at what I am, really look, and decide for yourself whether you walk away or stay. Because, Anna, I will not lie to you. I will not hide what I am. But I will also not let you go back to that life thinking you're invisible, thinking you don't matter, thinking the knowledge you carry is worth less than the credentials they refuse to give you. I looked up at him, at this impossible man who shouldn't exist, and I felt something crack open inside my chest, something I'd kept locked away for so long I'd forgotten it was there. I don't know how to do this, I whispered. Neither do I, he said, and then, softer. But I'd like to try. I spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself I could walk away. 3 weeks of visiting Micah in the hospital, watching color return to his face, listening to him talk about the future like it was something he was allowed to have. 3 weeks of going through the motions of my old life, deliveries, warehouse shifts, pretending I was the same person I'd been before I learned that the world was wider and stranger and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. And 3 weeks of Jeriel waiting. He didn't call, didn't show up at my apartment or my work. He simply existed somewhere in the city, patient and inevitable as the tide, and I could feel him there. Could feel the weight of the choice he'd given me pressing against my chest every time I tried to sleep. I researched. God help me, I researched. I read every piece of vampire folklore I could find, trying to separate myth from reality, trying to understand what he was, what he'd offered me. And the more I learned, the more terrified I became, not of what he was, but of how much I wanted it. Wanted him. Wanted to stop being invisible, to stop apologizing for taking up space, to finally become someone who mattered. But wanting something doesn't make it right. And I'd spent my whole life learning that some desires cost more than you can afford to pay. I was walking home from the hospital on a Tuesday night when they found me. 3 of them. Moving so fast they were just shadows peeling away from the alley walls, their eyes reflecting streetlight like animals. I didn't have time to scream. Didn't have time to run. One of them slammed me against the brick wall hard enough to crack my skull, and I felt blood, hot and wet, sliding down the back of my neck. The human who saved the queen. The voice was female, cold as a blade. Jeriel Wells' little pet. Do you have any idea what you cost us? I couldn't answer. Could barely breathe. Her hand was around my throat, lifting me off the ground, and somewhere distant I heard my grandmother's voice saying, "Breathe, Anna, breathe through the pain," but I couldn't breathe. The world was going gray at the edges, narrowing to a pinpoint of light that was getting smaller and smaller, and I thought, this is how I die. After everything. After surviving so long. Then the hand was gone. I hit the ground hard, gasping, and when I looked up, Jeriel was there. Not the controlled, elegant man I'd met in the garden. This was something older. Something that moved like violence given form, all speed and fury and absolute certainty. The 3 vampires didn't stand a chance. It was over in seconds. And when the silence returned, when the bodies of my attackers were nothing but ash scattering in the wind, Jeriel knelt beside me and I saw his face. Devastated. That's the only word for it. He looked at me the way I'd looked at Micah through the ICU glass, like he was watching the most important thing in his world slip away and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Anna. My name was a prayer in his mouth. Anna, stay with me. I tried to speak, but blood filled my mouth. There was too much of it. Too much pain. My vision was blurring, darkening, and I could feel my heartbeat slowing, stuttering like a clock winding down. I can save you. His voice was breaking. I'd never heard him sound like that. Desperate, terrified, human. But you have to choose. Do you understand? You have to choose. I understood. Even dying, even with my thoughts scattering like leaves in a wind, I understood what he was offering. Transformation. Immortality. A life that would never end, that would outlast everyone I loved, that would change me in ways I couldn't predict or control. If I do this. My voice was barely a whisper. Will I still be me? He touched my face, so gently I almost couldn't feel it. You'll be more than you've ever been. I thought about my grandmother, about all the women before her who'd carried knowledge the world tried to bury, who'd healed in the shadows because the light didn't want them. I thought about Micah, healthy now, with a future spreading out before him like a road he could finally walk. I thought about spending the rest of my life invisible, apologizing for existing, working myself to death for scraps. And I thought about what it would feel like to finally be seen. Then do it, I whispered. The pain that came after was unlike anything I'd ever known. Fire in my veins, in my bones, burning away everything I'd been and remaking me into something new. I died in that alley. I'm certain of it. Died, and was reborn in Jeriel's arms while he whispered words I couldn't understand in a language older than the city itself. When I opened my eyes again, the world was different. Sharper, brighter. I could hear heartbeats in the buildings around us, could smell rain coming from miles away, could feel the pulse of life thrumming through the city like a symphony I'd been deaf to my entire existence. And I was hungry. I know. Jeriel's voice was soft.
I know. I'll teach you.
I promise. He kept that promise. 5 years. That's how long it took to learn what I was, to master the hunger, to understand that immortality wasn't a gift or a curse, it was simply a different way of being. 5 years of walking beside Jeriel through a world I'd never known existed, learning the politics of shadow courts and blood oaths, discovering that my grandmother's journal was only one piece of a much larger tapestry of forgotten knowledge. And 5 years to build something that mattered. The Rosalind Gates Institute opened on a spring morning when the cherry blossoms were in full bloom. 3 stories of glass and light in the heart of Seattle, where mortal and immortal medicine merged, where women like my grandmother were finally honored instead of dismissed, where no one would ever be turned away because they lacked the right credentials or the right last name. I stood at the entrance with Jeriel beside me, my partner, my equal, the man who'd waited 800 years to find someone who could see him the way he saw me, and I thought about the delivery driver I'd been. The woman who'd believed she was invisible, who'd thought her knowledge didn't matter, who'd spent 31 years apologizing for taking up space. That woman died in an alley. And the woman who rose in her place would be seen forever. Micah was there, of course. 32 now, healthy, brilliant, building a life that was entirely his own. He hugged me before the ribbon cutting, whispered in my ear, "Grandma would be so proud of you." I knew he was right. I could feel her sometimes, in the quiet moments, her voice threading through my thoughts like a melody I'd never quite forgotten. Knowledge has to be passed on, Anna. It can't die with us. It wouldn't. Not anymore. There are women like me all over this city. Women who thought they knew what their lives would look like until the night everything changed.
We don't talk about it.
But we recognize each other. In the way we move through the world now. In the way we no longer apologize for taking up space. If this story woke something in you that's been sleeping too long, if you felt understood here, even for a moment, then stay. Because there are more stories like this. More women like us. And they're easy to lose if you let them slip by. I was invisible for 31 years. Now, I'll be seen forever.